They built a shiny gated entrance right across the only road I had a legal right to use, and somehow they still acted surprised when I didn't smile, nod, and disappear. That's the thing about money. I guess it can make people feel real brave about stepping on somebody else's rights, especially when that somebody lives out of sight behind the trees. What they forgot was simple and deadly to their whole little plan. That road wasn't a favor, it wasn't a handshake deal, and it sure as hell wasn't optional. It was in my deed. So let me back up a second, because this didn't start with me looking for a fight. I wasn't sitting around waiting to go to war with the developer. I was living my life. My land sits behind what used to be open acreage outside a little town called Red Hollow, one of those places where time mostly minds its own business until somebody with deep pockets shows up and decides the land would look better with stone walls, polished signs, and people who say things like private community with a straight face. I bought my place years before any of that came along. Back then, the parcel in front of me was just scrub grass, a few crooked trees, and a narrow dirt road that ran out to the county road. That road was my access. Not mostly, not when convenient. It was a recorded easement filed properly tied to my property permanent. I still remember sitting at closing while the title agent tapped the page and said, "This guarantees your access. Nobody can block it." I nodded like any normal person would, because why would I imagine I'd one day need to defend the most basic fact of how I got to my own land? And for years I didn't have to. I drove in and out, no drama, no meetings, no disputes. Sometimes I'd wave at the guy leasing cattle on the front parcel. Sometimes I'd just roll through in silence and enjoy how far away the rest of the world felt. It was quiet out there, honest, predictable. I liked it that way. Then one spring, little orange survey flags started showing up, then stakes, then trucks, then men in reflective vests standing around with clipboards like the future had already been approved. A few weeks later, I got a letter from a development company saying they'd bought the front parcel and were planning a high-end subdivision private upscale controlled access. All those words that sound polished until you've been around long enough to know they usually mean somebody else is about to get squeezed. Still, I didn't panic. I pulled my paperwork, checked the easement language again, then drove into town and sat down with a local attorney named Dennis Hale. Dennis had been handling land issues around Red Hollow longer than most people had been pretending they understood real estate. He read the documents, leaned back, and said, "You're fine. They can build around it. They can't block it." That was enough for me. I figured professionals would see the easement design around it and keep moving. For a while, that seemed to be exactly what was happening. Roads got paved, curbs went in, landscaping showed up, and I'll be honest, the place looked good. Clean lines, nice stonework, the kind of development meant to make people feel like they'd bought their way into order itself. I even had the passing thought that maybe this whole thing would help my property value. Then the entrance started going up. At first it was just framing, then walls, then steel, then keypad posts, cameras, gate arms, all of it slowly taking shape in a way that made the hairs on the back of my neck rise. Because this thing wasn't off to the side, it wasn't near my access road, it was on it. I remember the first time I drove up and saw it fully finished, I actually slowed down like my eyes needed extra time to tell my brain what kind of nonsense I was looking at. There it was. Stone columns, polished sign, landscaped median, fancy metal lettering, and a locked gate sitting right across the exact strip of road I'd used for years. I stopped the truck and just sat there with the engine running. There was a keypad, a little screen, a call button. I pressed it. Some calm voice came through asking for my access code. I didn't have one, so I hit the call button again and got security. I said, "I live back here. This is my access road." There was a pause, the kind where you can hear somebody deciding whether you sound important enough to matter. Then the voice said, "Sir, this is a private gated community. If you're visiting a resident, they can grant access." I said, "I'm not visiting anybody. I own property behind this gate. I have a legal easement through this land." Another pause. "Then I don't have any record of that. Without authorization, I can't open the gate." And there it was. That cold little click inside my chest. Not rage, not yet. Something worse. Recognition. To them, I wasn't an owner. I was an inconvenience. A mismatch in their system. A guy who lived behind the polished version of the story they wanted to sell. I said, "I'm not asking for permission to use my own legal access." And the voice, still smooth, still detached, said, "I'm telling you, I can't open the gate." That was the moment this stopped being a misunderstanding. I turned around, took the rough back trail to get home, and thought the same thought all the way to my kitchen table. They knew. They had to know. Nobody drops millions into a development without reviewing title access, utility lines, easements, all of it. which meant this wasn't an accident. They built a problem on purpose and figured I'd either fold accept a code or be too small to matter. That night, I spread every document I owned across the table and read them slowly, line by line. The language was clean. Permanent access. Unobstructed ingress and egress. No interference by the servient estate. Dry words sure but powerful when somebody decides to ignore them. And sitting there in that quiet house, I realized something that made me a whole lot calmer than anger ever could have. I didn't need to outshout them. I just needed to outlast them. The next morning, I went back to Dennis. I told him about the gate, the keypad, the security call, all of it. He didn't interrupt. Didn't look surprised. When I finished, he said, "They restricted access. That's not a gray area." I asked him what the first move should be. He tapped the paperwork and said, "You don't argue with the gate. You document the obstruction. Then you notify them properly. After that, the system starts doing what it was built to do." So that's what I did. I took photos from every angle. I pulled county records. I printed plat maps, subdivision plans, easement descriptions. I drove back to the entrance and got denied again just to make sure nothing had changed. Same voice, same refusal, same fake polite tone, like I was asking to borrow something instead of use what was already mine. That second trip, I noticed a man standing near the entrance. Too well dressed to be security, too calm to be construction. He walked over while I was getting out of the truck and asked, "You having trouble?" I said, "I live back there. This is my access road." He nodded once and said, "You're the easement owner." Not a question. That told me all I needed to know. I said, "Then you know this gate doesn't belong here." He looked at the entrance, then back at me and said, "Our legal team reviewed it. You'll still have access." I almost laughed. Access doesn't mean permission. That landed harder than he wanted it to. I could see it in his face. He started talking about resident security design standards, the integrity of the community. I finished the sentence for him and said, "And I'm not part of the picture you're selling." He didn't deny it. He just said they believed the issue had been accommodated. I told him, "Good, then you won't mind if I have it reviewed too." His face changed a little at that. Just a flicker. Not fear exactly. More like the first crack in certainty. Back home, I drafted the formal notice. Clean, precise, no chest beating. I cited the recorded easement described the obstruction, included copies demanded restoration of unobstructed access, and sent it certified so nobody could later pretend it got lost under a stack of marketing brochures and fake Tuscan paint samples. Then I waited, not passively, just patiently. About 2 weeks later, county vehicles started showing up near the entrance. Then more of them. Inspectors with vests and clipboards walking the perimeter, pointing at things, taking notes. I drove by slow and didn't stop, but I didn't need to. I knew exactly what I was looking at. This had moved out of the world of private arrogance and into public compliance. That was the twist they never planned for. Because once county review gets involved in a project that size, everything connects. Roads, permits, access, approvals, inspections, utility sign-offs, final plat, releases, closings. It's like pulling one bad thread in an expensive sweater. Suddenly the whole thing starts coming apart in your hands. And Red Hollow, being Red Hollow, word traveled. At first it was little whispers. There's some issue with the entrance. They're reviewing access. There's a paperwork problem. Then it got sharper. Closings are being delayed. Buyers are nervous. Final approvals are stuck. One afternoon, a real estate agent I barely knew stopped me outside the hardware store and said, low and careful, "You're the guy with the road issue, right?" I gave her half a nod. She said, "Closings are backing up. People are getting jumpy." Then she gave me this look like she was trying to decide whether I was a problem or a public service. I said I didn't build the gate. She laughed, but not much. A few days later, the gate was standing open with a temporary sign that said, "Manual access only." A man with a clipboard was waving cars through one at a time like they were trying to turn a legal violation into a customer service experience. But that didn't solve anything. My right wasn't to be helped through. My right was to pass through without being controlled at all. Then the call came. Unknown number. Smooth voice. The man from the gate. He introduced himself as Daniel Mercer, project director. He said they were aware of my concerns and working toward resolution. I said that's good because it's still an obstruction. He tried to talk about temporary measures. I cut him off and said temporary fixes don't cure permanent violations. Then he asked the question that told me they were finally hurting. What would you consider an acceptable outcome? I leaned back in my chair and looked at the stack of papers still living on my kitchen table like they paid rent there. I said the easement stays open. No gate, no keypad, no control system. Exactly as recorded. Silence. Then he said that may not align with the design of the community. I smiled, Because right there in one sentence, he admitted the truth. They hadn't made a mistake. They had made a choice. They wanted exclusivity more than they respected existing rights. So I said, then your design is the problem. After that, the whole mood around the place changed. You could feel it. Workers standing around waiting, meetings behind closed doors, clean confidence replaced by tight smiles and stalled machinery. Money doesn't like delay. Investors like it even less. The last time Daniel and I spoke in person, we stood side by side looking at the entrance. He said quieter than before, this wasn't intentional. I looked at the steel, the stone, the wiring, the whole ridiculous monument to selective memory and said, that's funny because it looks very intentional. He admitted their team had believed they could accommodate my access inside the system. That word again, accommodate, like I was being offered a courtesy. I said, you don't have options here, you have obligations. That was the first moment he stopped talking like a man managing a problem and started sounding like a man reporting to one. About 10 days later, I drove up and saw crews tearing the whole thing apart. Not adjusting it, not upgrading it, not relocating it. Removing it, the gate arms came off first. Then the control boxes. Then the stonework framing the choke point. Wiring hung out in the open. Dust drifted through the air. The pretty little fantasy of a sealed-off entrance came apart piece by piece, and I'm not going to lie to you, standing there watching it happen felt good. Real good. Not because I enjoy wreckage, but because there is something deeply satisfying about seeing the law walk back in through the front door after money tried to lock it out. By the end of it, there was a permanent open section where my easement crossed the entrance, a visible break in the grand design, something nobody could close, nobody could spin, nobody could pretend away. Every resident driving in would see it, a reminder in stone and asphalt that not everything yields to polish and pressure. Daniel came over one last time and said it'll stay open. I nodded and said it always should have. Then he hit me with one final line. He said, you understand this cost us? And I told him, yeah, I do. But building over something you had no right to touch was always going to cost somebody. That was the end of it. In the weeks after the project moved forward again, houses sold, landscaping got finished, life kept going, but that open strip stayed exactly the way it had to stay, plain exposed, untouchable. Every time I drove through it, I felt the same thing. Not triumph exactly. Something steadier, like a line had been pushed, tested, and refused to move. And maybe that was the real lesson in all of it. People love to talk about rights until those rights get in the way of profit, convenience, appearance, or somebody's fancy master plan. Then suddenly they want compromise. They want flexibility. They want you to be reasonable. What I learned out there was bitter and simple. A lot of people don't respect a boundary until ignoring it gets expensive. So yeah, some folks around town thought I should have just taken a code and kept the peace. Some thought I saved every buyer in that subdivision from moving into a legal mess with lipstick on it. Me, I think if you let somebody turn your rights into a favor, sooner or later, they'll start charging you for your own front door. I'm curious where you land on it. Was I right to hold the line and force them to tear it out, or should I have accepted the workaround and let the community keep its gate? And more than that, when somebody powerful crosses a line with a smile, do you owe them compromise? Or do you owe yourself a backbone? Tell me what you think, and if you've ever had to stand your ground when somebody bigger, richer, or louder thought you'd fold, I want to hear that story too.